Yes, it's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. We're in the company of Catherine Field, Paris correspondent for New Zealand Print and Radio. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good.
Also joining us, David Chazan, correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. Nice to see you again, sir.
Good to see you, Francois.
Eduardo Quay, international affairs editor and columnist. Nice to see you as well.
Hello, Francois. We
love visitors here at France 24, and we have one. She's just dropped in from this quiet spot called Athens. Natalie Savarakis, our correspondent in Greece. Thank you for blessing us with your presence.
Great to be here, Francois.
Okay. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. It was Tuesday, Bastille Day in this country, that they struck a deal in Vienna. Nuclear negotiators overcoming 12 years of protracted negotiations, the resistance of hardliners, paving the way for what many hope will be an historic thaw in relations with Tehran. Tehran, where our correspondents were met with some pretty high hopes on the streets.
After 40 years, this is the night of our victory. After 40 years, we are free.
People are happy because everything will change now and we'll be able to prove who we are to the world.
The economy will improve, foreigners can come into the country, anything can happen and everything will change.
Anything can happen and everything will change. Catherine Field?
When I heard this, I was so surprised because for once diplomacy is working. We seem to be in a world at the moment where warfare seems to be the way to solve disputes. And now that we've had this diplomatic push, I think it will go a long way to changing a lot in the Middle East. Nothing is possible in the Middle East to solve any of the issues there unless you bring Iran on board. Bringing Iran back into the negotiating area will be good, certainly for the people in Iran, an ancient civilization, a young, intelligent population. It's going to be good for them too. Okay, it's a bit of a gamble. We're bringing them into the tent when they could still play naughty games. But we did the same with the Soviet Union. And this type of negotiation and also having that stick, which is very important, that stick where sanctions can snap back in, is worthwhile.
And as for the aspirations of those young people we saw on the streets of Tehran?
That is just wonderful, isn't it? Because even they know as well, this window of opportunity for Iran is very small. The supreme leader is not in good health. So any minute, these talks could have just crumbled because of a change at the top in Iran. So for them, it is a good move. They're young enough to know what the possibilities of the future are. They're in touch with social media. They know what the rest of the world's doing, and they want part of it, naturally.
All right, I would say the pen is mightier than the sword, but of course they haven't signed as such a deal because then they'd have to get approval from the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, but they will get it because to block it, then the Congress would need a 2/3 majority in both houses, in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And President Obama came out, at his press conference swinging and said, and implied, if necessary, he'll use his presidential veto to make sure it goes through. Nevertheless, there's a lot of disquiet among the Republicans. The Israelis are not happy. And interestingly, neither are the Saudis. And a former head of Saudi military intelligence has been warning that he basically agrees with Netanyahu that this puts Iran on the road to a bomb. So lots of things to manage there. It's interesting that, in the ever-shifting landscape of the Middle East, that Saudi Arabia and Israel might just find themselves on the same side for once.
All right, but these are the grumblings in the heat of the moment. In 5 years' time, will things be more, shall we say, soothed between Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, how this agreement actually plays out in practice. I mean, there is some risk that it could trigger a nuclear arms race, because if the Saudis really do believe that Iran is bent on acquiring a bomb, that this agreement somehow makes the path towards that easier, then they're going to want one too. Presumably so would the Egyptians. But I probably agree with Catherine. I think it was a good thing. It was the only thing, really, because what was the alternative? was continued conflict and war. Also, I think the Iranian regime has reached a point where sanctions have started to bite so much that the economy is suffering so much that they really do have to listen to the voices of those younger people that you were talking about.
Now, after his recent warming of relations with Cuba, Barack Obama digging his heels in for a fight, as David was mentioning, with a hostile Republican-led Congress to submit what could surely be his biggest diplomatic coup.
This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change. Change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure.
Eduardo Quay, does it? Does it make the world safer and more secure?
I think so. And again, I agree what was the alternative. But I think we have to point something out, is that unlike agreements, past agreements with North Korea, for example, on the nuclear issue, this one does seem to be pretty tight. That snapback mechanism that allows the six powers that negotiated this agreement with Iran to reimpose all sanctions without any other Security Council vote, thereby no member of the Council could use the veto power, none of the permanent members of the Council, is very important. And the way it works is actually quite simple. If any of those six powers that negotiated the agreement feel that Tehran is violating it, they take it to a commission. If this is not agreed, if this is not resolved in 30 days, the sanctions go automatically back. They're going to be looking very, very closely at Iran. Iran really is not going to have much of a choice. It's going to have to follow this agreement if it doesn't want those sanctions back. And I think it also should be pointed out that the length of the agreement, which is 10 years, in 10 years, there could be major economic development in Iran, tremendous investment, and as was pointed out, very intelligent, educated, young people. Are they really going to be that interested in building a bomb? Well, we'll see. Maybe not. But again, what was the alternative? And nuclear arms race would have definitely started without this agreement.
Of course, there's one man who we've heard a lot from this week who does not agree with that particular thesis.
What a stunning, historic mistake. Israel is not bound by this deal with Iran, and Israel is not bound by this deal with Iran because Iran continues to seek our destruction. We will always defend ourselves.
And again, Natalie Savarakis, what everyone's wondering is the region going to be safer or more volatile in the years to come?
Well, I think that's a big question. If anything from my travels to the Middle East, you feel everything is a gamble there. You really don't know which side this is going to go. I think the interesting question now, especially with ISIS, is can the U.S. use Iran, or at least, not as an ally, but, could we be headed to a shifting of alliances in the region, and once the, all-time foe, Iran, could slowly turn into something more of a help, but that's going to be, we'll have to watch Obama as how he plays out between Saudi, keeping them happy, as you mentioned earlier, they're going to be quite feeling the disquiet of having, Iran there as a potential help, if you like, but also, it's going to be an interesting balancing act to see how all this plays out, because they've been, at the moment, the Shias, it's all basically down to that.
It's an open secret that already the Iranians and the Americans are allied when it comes to Iraq, and yet when it comes to Syria, it's a different story.
It's a different story, but that's the way the world is down there. You're an ally in one country, you're an enemy in the other. Is what you were saying about Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, that's very interesting. He's going to have a difficult time now because he's always been relying on the Israeli lobby in the United States to get his way through Congress and through the Senate. Well, he might just find in the next couple of weeks that oil speaks very loudly to particular members of the U.S. Congress.
But so what? His domestic public opinion agrees with him.
Yeah. But what can he do? He can talk all he wants, but what is he going to do? Bomb Iranian nuclear sites? What is he going to do? There's not much that he can do. And I agree that this is likely going to pass despite a Republican opposition, because what Obama needs in the end is just support from 1/3 of one of the houses after the veto. So it's likely to pass. And Obama didn't just hint at a veto. He said he would veto any attempt to block this, and probably will win.
David Chazan?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we're seeing for the first time, as you pointed out, a split between Israeli public opinion and Jewish American public opinion. And it's really not the same thing. And there are people, even members of IPAC, the big Jewish lobby group in the US, who for the first time are starting to try to tone down the Israelis, because many of them feel that Netanyahu has just gone too far. And they are really empty threats that he's uttering. What's he going to do? Iran is a very big, sophisticated country. It's not like bombing Lebanon. So obviously the Israelis have huge concerns, though, over Iranian support for Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza.
And does this strengthen this deal Hezbollah's hand in places like Lebanon and Syria?
Well, if Iran uses all of the assets that are going to be unfrozen around the world, the additional oil revenue to pump weaponry and support into Hezbollah or even Hamas, as far as they can get stuff into Gaza, yeah, I mean, it could be a problem for Israel.
But is that in Iran's long-term interest?
Probably not. No, that's the calculation. Probably not.
And also, you have a situation where these sanctions are going to be gradually lifted, so there's always the possibility of stopping them. I think that Iran is going to look at its own interests first. And what are those interests? Its own economic development and being able to come back into the concert of nations and to play a role in the Middle East, essentially.
Yeah. And there again, you know, if this kind of aging gerontocracy that still rules the Islamic Republic wants to hang on to power, they do have to think about the dissent among the young people in Iran, which we haven't heard much of for the past few years, but by all accounts is still quite strong, because as Catherine was saying, they're plugged into social media. They know what's going on in other parts of the world, and they want to join the conversation.
And the memory of the last attempt at overthrowing the regime in Iran, you know, people remember how close they came to be able to chasing the old guard from the Islamic Republic out of office. It was a very close-run thing.
If we can just go back to Netanyahu for a moment, I think a lot of Jewish Americans and a lot of Israelis are very upset with him in the way he has ruined that relationship between Washington and
it was the key alliance for Israel.
It was the key alliance for Israel. And
but is it really ruined?
Well, it's not the same. I don't think it's
strained.
It's strained.
Certainly, there's a lot of tension between Netanyahu and Obama on a personal level. Netanyahu's visit to America just before the last American election, where he addressed Congress without really informing Obama in advance, didn't get to see Obama, certainly put things under strain. But the fundamentals of the alliance do remain strong, I would say.
And Netanyahu has done nothing to ease that strain. I mean, it's almost as though every time it looked as though the relationship could, you know, get back onto some sort of even footing, there would be an announcement about new settlements being built. There would be some sort of skirmish along the border with Lebanon or with on the border with Syria. So you know, Netanyahu has constantly been niggling away at this relationship and doing nothing actually to let it flower a bit more back towards or even in the direction of what it once was.
All right. And you got to hand it to the Greeks, because a week where this historic deal happens, and yet you still manage to get in the news cycle, not just a little bit, but to actually almost overtake Iran on.
We're trying our best here, you know.
11 million people. How do you do it?
I guess we keep it interesting, you know, like we have a referendum every so often, democracy, you know, we need to strengthen that, and also then we need to keep our creditors on their feet.
Well, let's go over some of those events. The week began with an all-nighter in Brussels, where a deal for Greece was only struck after Northern European leaders publicly contemplated the idea of a Grexit, of kicking the Greeks out of the euro. Since then, What have we seen? Backbench dissent in the Greek and German parliaments, finger-pointing between creditors, a strike Wednesday in Greece, talk of a reshuffle, but also news that as of next Monday, banks will finally reopen after 3 crippling weeks. Natalie Savarakis.
Hurrah.
What's it been like having banks closed for 3 weeks?
Well, listen, I've been so busy with work that I haven't been able to distract myself. I mean,
what do you do? Do you have
well,
cash
you feel
in
like
pocket?
a 12-year-old again, you know? You have your 60 € allowance a day and you're like, okay, what do I do with it? Priorities, you know? So, you know, you have 20 euros for the cab and then 40 euros. Yeah, it's just difficult. I mean, I was extremely angry. For the first time in my life, I found myself really affected by a story I'm reporting on. And, you know, I'd be interviewing everyone and then I'd go for coffee and I'd start swearing at the waiter. And I want my money and I can't get it. It's difficult, you know. And me, again...
Because the shops can't get change either when they...
It's starting to, you know, so you're kind of negotiating with a cab driver and then you go get a coffee because Greece is a cash-based economy. It's not like in France where you just pay everything with your card. So I go for my coffee, it's like 2 euros. I was like, can I use the card? And they're looking at me. But, you know, there's an element of understanding. But again, I want to stress this, the difficult is not me or... It's the pensioners, you know, who don't have cash cards, you know, and they need to queue in like the scorching heat outside the banks, which are open just for them. They need to figure out what bank to go to because not all banks are open and wait for their pension. And they don't get their entire pension. They get a fraction of it, 120 euros every week. So imagine an 82-year-old who has to queue in the heat to get, I mean, this is... They didn't if they were seeing this coming, they should have organized themselves better.
And what have 3 weeks of banks being closed done to the psyche of the Greeks?
Listen, I don't know about, if, you know, you've traveled to Greece, you know, they're like quite temperamental. I thought it was going to be chaos in the streets, and yet, no, they were patiently waiting. For the first time, I saw an orderly queue in Greece, you know, waiting outside the banks to get their cash, cracking jokes, you know, it was good, but they're fed up now, you know, they're like, their patience is, you know, they're losing it slowly. And especially with all this referendum, we're saying no to the austerity measures, but hey, Parliament says yes. So they're kind of like in limbo here, kind of confused.
I think everyone's confused because when the week began, Catherine Field, Monday morning, you turned on the radio here in France. You thought, and basically the headlines were Europe saved. Now it doesn't feel like that.
It doesn't feel saved at all. In fact, I think this is going to go down as a monumental moment for the European Union. Instead of this usual consensus, which was supposed to come about through the Maastricht Treaty, you had the really, you know, fisticuffs in Brussels. It really has changed from a consensus to a big fight and a big open fight, which is really new in Europe. And I think we're now going to see far more of these smaller countries taking that lead to be able to come out publicly and say, hey, we don't like this. And that's not what the EU is meant to be about.
All right, we're going to look into that fight when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.